I was expecting a fairly varied group, and so I've just mentioned some of the law. So the Disability Discrimination Act here in 1995 was the first one, and in America Section 508 is the one that you'll see cited quite a lot when people are talking about accessibility as part of the American disability law. Sender special educational needs. The Disability Rights Commission produced a code of practice for post-16 education related services, and that was revised in 2006. There's a Euro Accessibility Consortium to promote accessibility, which was launched in 2003. And I've also listed here a report by the Disability Rights Commission on the web, access and inclusion for disabled people. And I recommend people to read that report because there's some very pertinent pointers as to what to do. Obviously that's particularly aimed at the web, but it's looking at the World Wide Web Consortium accessibility guidelines and how widespread they are applied in this country, which is not very, and it's perhaps fine-tuning some of the priorities in that to look at how best to include disabled users in this country. So, and there's a lot of detail in there. It's a very good report. What comes out of a lot of this is that making things easy to use by people with disabilities is an anticipatory duty owed to disabled people and to students at large. I'm mainly concerned with students here, but it's people at large really. It is not simply a duty to individuals. So although, depending on someone's disability, sometimes they may need to have special material produced for them. Really, I think the implication of this law is that wherever possible, you don't do things specially for them. You produce material, not with individuals in mind, but material that will be accessible should disabled users come along. You don't just do it when they do come along. Organisations that offer goods and services on the web already have a legal duty to make their sites accessible. The Disability Rights Commission have warned that many do not comply with existing equal access laws, and it's only a matter of time before they face legal challenge. There is as yet no case law in the UK. There is case law around the world, but not yet in the UK. And as far as I know, it's not going to be easy for a disabled user to make a legal challenge. I think a legal challenge is going to have to come from some bigger organisation. But again, it's not particularly easy for them either because of the way the law is worded, using words like reasonable, so you can argue for hours, and at very large cost about what reasonable is. So, it could be some time before we actually get the case law in the UK, although we can look at case law around the world. And I've put down at the bottom here NB Silver Surfers, because there are more and more older retired people who do have special needs. For example, my husband is retired and he's going blind. He's not blind yet, but he is going to suddenly come into this category of someone who requires accessibility. And there are plenty of older people who are enthusiastically using the web. So that's another quite large group that hopefully will bring some weight to bear on forcing people to implement this law. There was a new Disability Discrimination Act in 2005, and no. and a revised code of practice for post-16 education and related services, December 2006. And it's this law which particularly places a duty on all to promote disability equality. Organisations have to do proactive anticipatory planning with a sign-off at the head of organisation level, and organisations are required to produce disability equality schemes, and that was required for December 2006, and this should be a whole institution approach. Again, this is not going to solve everything because we've got one.
We've got one.
We have got one. We have got a disability equality scheme, and it does have actions and things in it. But the way they're worded, they are very vague and general so far. But at least there is one. It is a step forward. It is. Why is this not? It's because of that. Why has this happened? I don't know why this has happened. Right. Really, the recommendations from a number of bodies are that you need to follow the World Wide Web Consortium Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which are an accepted international standard. So obviously that's the way to go for web design, and we would hope that in something like the School of Computing and Informatics this would be taught as a matter of course in the various classes. Well, in our school we do have bits and pieces of it, but it really hasn't yet got a systematic embedding into the courses, but we are hoping to improve that. But there is some already, and one of my colleagues, Pauline Smith, told me that she's just been on a placement visit, and when we go to placements we ask the companies, is there anything that you think our students should know that they didn't know when they came here? And her company has just said they should know about accessibility, which is great. There's those kind of things that are really going to help. Oh, why is it doing that? I'm not going to go through all these, but you can look. These are easily available, the WCAG Top 10, and a lot of it refers to providing alternatives. So images and animations use the alt attribute, so put in alternative text. Multimedia use captions and transcripts, use hypertext links that make sense. And there are a few more technical things about the way you set up websites so that it makes them easier for people to access and to use with their assistive technology. Usability. Now this is good practice guidelines for people designing computer systems and designing websites, and we do have courses on human-computer interaction. But the kinds of things usability would suggest to do, some of them are technical, like keep load times and sizes small, but other things are content effective, use plain language, be consistent with where you put your links, and aids to navigation, that kind of thing. We have done various research in this department, the Intelligent Systems Recognition Group. So there's a paper by Brown et al. Which looks at designing multimedia for people with learning disabilities, and there is a section on there on dyslexia. Evett and Brown, text guidelines for visually impaired and dyslexic readers, which we call Clear Text for All, because what we've done here is we've looked at the production of documents and the text in those documents, and we've merged recommendations from the British Dyslexia Association, the RNIB, usability guidelines, the WCAG. We've looked at the overlap for those, and we've looked at particular needs for some of the different groups, and what we've produced are a set of guidelines for producing text which would make it accessible to a range of people. But we also suggest that following those guidelines will make it better for everyone. The aims for this are universal access and inclusion. And another project the group is involved in is input devices for motor disability. I've written here, given a slide with the main points for clear text for all, and these are mainly concerned with the visual properties of text, so the point size, the font, the colour, alignment, contrast, those kind of things. You can see that those guidelines are published. And what we have done is suggested that clear text should be used, clear text for all should be used for documents produced, especially for students, things like exam papers, handouts, documents that are put on the web. We've also applied these guidelines to the text produced in PowerPoints. A lot of these guidelines, both the clear text and the guidelines for the PowerPoints, are really just good practice. If you look at textbooks, which, you know, sort of basic first year undergraduate textbooks telling you how to do presentations and telling you how to write reports, the good practice they suggest is consistent with all these guidelines. Not everybody obviously always follows them. But the point I'm trying to make is that these aren't radical proposals, and they are proposals which produce material that's better for everyone. And there's no real excuses for not doing it, and it is of benefit for all. Now, I described previously applying the Clear Text for All guidelines to PowerPoints at an annual learning and teaching conference last year. We produced a set of guidelines for PowerPoints, mainly concerned with the visual properties of text. So again, looking at the visual features such as font size, highlighting, backgrounds, that sort of thing. Language features such as trying to write clear English, issues about colour and the way the slides are organised. We demonstrated, using material in lectures, that slides so produced were better for all. All students found that slides produced in accordance with the guidelines were clearer, easier to read. In the paper, we also discussed what should be done with the non-text items, but the experiments that we did and the guidelines that we produced were mainly concerned with text. Sometimes they didn't bring out more general principles, which really I think it's better to have more general principles because it covers more material. So to some extent they need perhaps some rewriting to make them more general. They also need to be expanded to include more recommendations for non-text items. We do also need to evaluate the guidelines further. We want to maintain the aims of universal access and inclusion. So we did a case study, took the guidelines and applied them to a lecture called Research Methods 1. And there's a Research Methods 2, which we're going to do as well. But hopefully, having done Research Methods 1, we now know everything we need to know for Research Methods 2. And this was a good choice to work on because the blind student who's over there couldn't read the original slides, and he can contribute if you feel like it, Alan. They did violate a number of the guidelines. They did have a lot of visual elements on the slides, so this is going to force us to bring out the recommendations for the for those in the guidelines. It would be helpful for the other modules on the course that this particular student is doing, hopefully spreading this good practice around a bit more. And so this lecture provides convenient and relevant evaluation material. And I am now going to go to this view because it allows me to show you some things on the slides. But what I'm going to do, firstly, I'm going to say the main problems that we found with these slides, and these were the main reasons why they were very difficult for Alan to follow. The person who made the slides had put text in text boxes, which Alan couldn't read with his screen reader. He had a lot of visual elements without text. Now this goes against everything, all the guidelines. Number one priority from the World Wide Web, provide alternatives. So that was very naughty. He often didn't group his graphics, didn't group his pictures. So I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Alan, that the screen reader would just go graphic, 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 graphic. Yeah. And if he grouped them, it would just go graphic once. So that's a good thing to do. Yeah. Also makes the slides a lot easier to edit, so that was not a good thing on all kinds of grounds. He had some very weird colours, which were a very strange green he had, which against the guidelines for colourblind. He also had long lists of numbers, which were incomprehensible, even if you could see them. And
it was quite interesting.
Sorry?
It was quite interesting, the long list of numbers.
And I've put not tables, and I'll give you an example of that later on. Material that could have easily been tabulated, he'd just put in as bullet points. Really, this is no special criticism of the person who created these slides. I think, a lot of us produce material like this under time constraints, and we just do half-hearted, second-hand, just notes really for us, which we will then explain to the students. And that is not best practice, and we all know that, and we all think, well, we'll go back and tidy them up, and often don't. And it's not just the person who created these slides that's guilty of that. But I think now that I've been through this with him, and he is now aware of the guidelines, it will prevent him doing it in the future. It will prevent him doing the things that really cause the barriers in the future. At least we can hope. Okay, so the white slides are before the guidelines were applied. Now, I'll just tell you something about that background. There's not a big difference, is there, in the backgrounds? But we found that this pale yellow or cream coloured background was preferred by a very significant majority of students in lecture theatres to the black on white.
Have you got that data anywhere?
Yes, it's in the paper for the. I don't know when it's coming out.
Because I'm very interested, because I'm interested in exam papers.
Yes, well, absolutely. Yeah.
Is there any research done in the fact that we could change all exam papers to like a pale buff colour?
Yes, so there is research. Yes. There is research done on that.
Put that forward, I mentioned it at the group, and they said, "Well, how do we know? How do we know what they
All right, I can give you my paper, and there is other research that's well known for dyslexics.
Yeah, because what's the cost? A little bit more to buy a book paper, and then everybody, it's easy to.
I did my notes last year. I had them photocopied by reprographics onto pale paper rather than stark white, and I think it was a halfpenny 1,000 more or something. They didn't mind at all. I asked them to do it, and they said, "Oh no, it's so little that we don't care." And you don't often hear that in this university, do you?
Because having to ask for an exam paper in a buff colour separately, it singles you out.
I know, it's stupid. I have made this point time and time again to SAS, to CAS. Really, that the exam papers should follow clear text rule guidelines, shouldn't they?
Yeah.
There's been a lot of research into dyslexia, and other people that I've worked with have often said this colour, they really prefer it because it makes the text jump out at them. But there are other people, my girlfriend is one of them, that needs a lime green colour.
I need bright yellow.
See, they've got to be different.
No, there are some people who have very particular colours, but I think the most commonly preferred colour is this black on the cream. So if people, I think, that would suit the majority, and then if people do have a very particular colour, then they can have their special one.
What I'm trying to say is that it's not set in stone. That the majority
it's not set in stone.
There are some that need another one. It's a case of where you set something up that it's not we've set it for this reason. I need a different colour.
No, I think it's a valid point, but I think you find that the majority is this. And it's definitely the case that other people have particular requirements. So I know for a fact that Emma likes justified text. And these guidelines, they are guidelines, they're not rules.
That's the only time you come across problems. When I researched one university who had come across one dyslexic student who liked pink paper, and they liked their notes put onto A3. So suddenly all dyslexic students were given A3 pink notes.
And that's not what the majority wants, is it?
And that's the problem, is finding out, obviously you've got to do something for the majority as long as you accept there are individual differences, which some places, once they've been given, an ideal, they're sometimes reluctant to change. As long as you avoid that, I think it's really good.
I think that's true, and I think the universities need to, you do have to provide alternatives in some cases, like producing Braille, which student support do here, or producing, in a completely different format or a special colour. But what we're trying to promote here is to do something that, fits in with the general recommendations, so that it is more suitable for all. Anyway, so that's number one. His slides were black on white. His titles, these aren't entirely original, because his titles were some horrible colour green. Don't know how he chose that out of the palette. I've put some little comments on some of these bits. There are no alternatives to the pictures, there's no description of them, and they aren't grouped. So if you look, you've got all these individual, they're all individual, all those lines, so if he ever wants to move it, and the same here, there's a wobbly line, and there's straight lines, just moving around, there's a text box. There's all kinds of problems on that slide. So following the guidelines, that slide was actually made into two slides. So what is sound? Small fluctuations in air pressure. One of the figures from the previous slide, and then a title to go with the figure. Figure 1, at any moment, the air between a source and a listener has areas of high pressure, etc., etc. So that it describes the picture, so there is an alternative. And I'll group the picture. And then the next one has the other diagram, or the other picture, which again is grouped, and again a legend with the picture. A plot of air pressure between source and listener is typically something like a distorted sine wave. But there's just some text. Might not be the best text in the world, but some text to go with the picture. Now here's another one. Again, nothing's grouped. This text is all in text boxes. Is that a text box? No, it isn't. That's a title. But he's got different spellings of that word. He's got different fonts. All these text boxes, and nothing's grouped. So here's the same slide. Again, put in a legend, proper text legend. Sound captured by a microphone produces an analogue signal. Made the spelling and the fonts consistent. And group the diagram. This was Alan's favourite. These aren't textbooks as they're bullet points, but here is a very long list of numbers, which, you know, I mean, it's meaningless to anyone really, isn't it? And even worse if you have to sit there and listen to it all read out. This is you know, part way through applying the guidelines. He applied them on his own first, and then I went through and so he added this text box legend, which is in a different font. So what we've got, I've just said that sentence isn't clear. Did anybody find that sentence clear? No. And this isn't very clear either, and this is a text box. So we've redone that slide. The top diagram shows a plot of the real signal values. The one below shows the quantized values. The bottom shows the difference. This is the quantization error. And actually, it's less to type, isn't it? Than well, he's pasted it in, hasn't he, from somewhere. The only issue I still have with this slide is there is a website where you can run these slides through a checker which will show you what they look like to a colourblind person. The most common version of colourblindness is red-green, and I've still got red on there, as you can see, which I shouldn't really have. And I've been I haven't managed to run it through this thing yet. That's the address, visicheck.com. And then I was going to look at and choose the colour, the best colour for those diagrams from there. I haven't quite managed to do that yet. And this is what I mean by not table. That's a text box. And then instead of actually putting this data in a table, he's just done it as bullet points across the page and tabbed it to lay it out. What have I said here? And the numbers would be read out across the page, so it wouldn't make very much sense, because you've got two separate titles and a very long line. It would be difficult to listen to, and it goes against the guidelines that we gave in the previous, which is really just to make the tables read left, right, make it sensible. And because what you want to do, one thing you can do to try and ensure that is to have a smaller number of columns, because then, you know, each row, you need to make sure that the row being read out is, you know, will fit into the short-term memory and with a meaningful title. We did, as part of the previous exercise, produce a macro which would allow you to swap your table round, transpose your table. So that would help you if you fiddled about with it to see which was a better way for laying it out. But it needs to be in a table in the first place before you can do that, doesn't it? And there's another text box on there, so we redid this slide. A bit more description, and then I think you can see that if this is read out, 3 bits give 8 possible values: 000, 001, 010, 011, 100, 101, 110, 111. I would hope that with the title and the pattern of the numbers, that would be a bit more meaningful. And I think it was, wasn't it, Alan?
Yeah, it was.
And then you've got the other one, 4 bits give 16 possible values, and then it reads out the 16 values and you can see the pattern. So, you know, so there's a bit of thought required in that. Oh, I need to go back and go back into slideshow. So we've come up with some additional guidelines for this from this exercise. Don't use text in text boxes. Group any diagrams. Use tables where appropriate and lay out for clarity. I think we got that really in the other guidelines, and just emphasising it here. avoid lists, and I think those are already in the that's already in the guidelines, but you know, this is such a good example of why not to do it here. Don't use colour for meaning. That hasn't come out of this study, but I know that is, you should make that point, so that, and that wasn't in the previous guidelines, so I just, you know, adding that in, remembered it. Perhaps a more general statement of that point is to keep form and content separate. Don't tie content to the form, so don't make the meaning depend on the colour. Separate form from content is a more general point, and I'm looking at what's the better way to word some of these things. Provide alternatives, of course that's already in the guidelines, but perhaps that needs to be made in a more general way to really stress how important that is, and I think possibly should be at the top of the list, as it is with the W3C. And I've put these animations in, but I really shouldn't. And I always try and put one in, you know, to illustrate why that's difficult. I think this would be fine for Alan to read with his screen reader, because if you look at the outline view of this slide, there's not a problem with it, so I think he'd read it okay. But this particular animation, as you can see, it's greying the stuff as it comes up, so that's not a good idea, really, to do. So I always try and bung in a bad animation.
That's the difference between screen readers as well, because with your screen reader wouldn't see that at all.
It would just avoid it.
It would just totally just say nothing. You might
Would it?
type it as soon as you put an animation or an effect in, it just doesn't read it at all.
But you could read that from the outline view, couldn't
Yeah,
you?
with the new screen reader, it seems to be working. Because it reads it in the virtual buffer, it doesn't actually read the screen, it puts it into a virtual buffer.
Yeah.
And it reads it. It just says to me, there are X amount of effects on the page, and then it will read the text. But this is a new one I've only had for a couple of months.
So they're very variable in the way they deal with those, aren't they?
But on normally animations and text effects, especially with yours one, it just doesn't say anything. It's like you said, they're all going speak to you.
Don't you have to have full stops after your bullets?
No.
Doesn't it roll?
No, it's in bullet points. With the newer one, with the Windows, it will tell me what type of bullet point it is. I only just realised that it says bullet 1, and it'll go on to the next one. With yours, it would maybe read the text, but it wouldn't read the bullet point.
Yeah, but I think, you know, in older versions, you did have to have full stops at the end.
Yeah.
You don't anymore.
You don't anymore?
No.
Because it uses the full stops for inflections and things like that, so if you don't put them in, you can just carry on.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
In text, but not, it's all right on bullet points, isn't it?
Yeah, it's fine in bullet points,
Okay.
but if you do it in text and you don't put your commas and things in, the screen will just keep
it
going.
goes on and on.
And it actually sounds as though it is running out of breath.
You'll hear
Yeah.
my talk.
Yeah.
I need a copy, but I think Alan and I might have sorted this out.
Yes.
It's going to give me a copy of his window eyes, which sounds, I think it is much more compatible with a lot of the more latest systems. Unfortunately, you know, these systems do get a hell of a lot of momentum in them, and I suppose, you know, I mean, say what you like about JAWS, it's difficult to keep up with all these different things, isn't it?
A lot of people are changing from JAWS to Windows lately.
They're not updating the script
You'll
files,
see
basically.
a different view with me later because I use Linux.
GW Micro.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah.
I've just brought the beta version out to work with Vista this week.
The first ones to do it.
Because they've gone in with Microsoft now.
Okay, so I've already made this point about trying to write the guidelines more generally, but you mustn't be too general so that people don't really know what they mean or what they refer to. So, you know, I've got these new things to add into the guidelines. I'm going to rewrite them and perhaps reorder them. One last thing, and yes, I need to be in slideshow to show this. Here's another slide. This is another effect. It does come under animations. It's called an animation as well. This was another slide that was in the set to illustrate the quantization effect. And as it says, original sound 16 bits per channel, and then there's an icon and a plot of that, quantize that to 3 bits per sample. He's got channel on one, sample on the other, so you know there's not a mistake. So you can see the way that the waveform has changed, and he was expecting people to click on it.
A lathe is a big tool. A lathe is a big tool.
Alan and I have got heartily sick of this, haven't we? And what I wanted to do was to sort this out by putting some alt text on the icon which said click here for the sound. And you can put alt text in PowerPoint, it just doesn't show. And there is I have discovered there is an error in the HTML for this. There are little tools which you should be able to do it with, but I still haven't found a way, even if I can get the alt text in, to give an alternative to the mouse click. But I did find a way to produce this so that it was more generally accessible, and this is what we did. One slide which explains. The next slide shows the quantized waveform of a small sound clip, which you can also hear, recorded with a small quantization range. The slide after that shows the distortion to the waveform caused by a large quantization range. This causes quantization error, which you can hear as hiss. And then you move to the next slide.
A lathe is a big tool. A lathe is a big tool.
And the one after that. And so the slides come on with the noise comes on with the slide for everyone. So that's you know, that's a bit better. But I'm determined to solve this alt text problem, but it does involve you know, very, very specialised discussion groups. Richard and I are working on it. I just thought I'd mention this because if you search on the web, and if you search on the Microsoft site, you will come to this paper called Creating Accessible Presentations by Glenna Shaw, and I've given a link to that paper there. But be wary, although there's some of the stuff on that paper that's very good, some of it doesn't work, like the alt text. There are some technical details and tips which are useful, but as I say, the alt text doesn't work. She suggests a way of attaching tips to web links, so it's alt text which tells you where the web link's going, but I think it's actually much better doing it as I've done it here, which is linking a sentence to the web link. I think that's more reasonable anyway. And then it gives you the web link in the alt text. So you know, you will have to work through that paper with care, critical care. So I thought I'd mention that. One of the things she says is work in the outline view, because that gives you a good view of what will be read and what order it will be read. And she also discusses producing for anything, and this might be the way to go for any document, you know, putting it into another format like PDF, so they all end up in a PDF column format, and you would want those PDFs to be accessible. People would have to know what to do to make them accessible though, and I know, although Alan's got some software that will read them. Anyway, what's it called again?
Text aloud.
Text aloud. So it'll read a lot of text files, and look, that sounds very useful. One of the things she says is use pictures, images, sound sparingly and only when they add value, and that's in quite a lot of the guidelines. But I just thought I'd warn you about that paper. So by doing this case study, we've come up with some more guidelines, more importantly for visual elements. Thought about trying to write these as more general principles. Some of these things are particular to what Graham did with this lot, like that's just lazy not putting that stuff in the table, isn't it? But you know, we've all done things like that. Other things, don't use text boxes, group things. For the diagrams, you can sort out the font for diagrams by setting up a template. because he struggled initially to change the font on any of those diagrams and to make things consistent. So we went through design templates and things. Obviously not everyone's going to know how to do that or want to know how to do that, so we could provide templates perhaps, or the university could have templates, couldn't they? You need to be careful with special features such as those sound clips. The way I've done it so the sound clips play wouldn't work for long clips. We want to promote universal access. The slides that I produced with the previous guidelines, I demonstrated that they were much more popular, significantly more popular for all students. For this particular case study, it's certainly the case for anybody. I know, if I sat down with my slides with someone else and they said, oh, don't do that, or, you spelt that wrong, your slides are always going to be improved by someone else looking at them. And these slides are improved because he's added the additional explanation. So it's difficult to assess the improvement due to the accessibility guidelines in this particular case study, because he's obviously spent more time on them than he would otherwise have done. But following the accessibility guidelines focuses attention on clarity, and they do produce clearer and better slides. We showed that before, and I think anybody would say that even with the extra, even with the extra explanation, I think the slides are clearer. I don't think I'm going to go through this other stuff here. Just to mention, we still haven't solved the problem with maths and symbols, and I hope Michael's going to talk about that a bit. You are.
Well, not relevant to PowerPoint.
Not relevant to PowerPoint, but it's a problem across everything, isn't it?
With web content, yes. Definitely.
Yeah. So there'll be some relevant issues, and I'm going to end the show. Oh, if you want to see, that's the outline view for anybody who doesn't know. I've talked about generally from here. I've talked about the barriers that exist. I know that although some of this accessibility stuff can create barriers, I know that there's still a lot of barriers in the real world. There's still a lot of barriers in the institution. For example, the disability scheme doesn't mention any of this, and a lot of staff are sometimes understandably reluctant to do it because they've got loads of notes and they don't want to rewrite them all. But I hope what I'm trying to promote, and if any of the educationalists had come, perhaps it would have helped, is to say, this sort of thing should be in, certificate of education, PGCE, all those kind of things. I'm sure they already are taught general good practice, and they need to add these things in. We need to make sure there's more of it in computing. And that's some of the things that I've said towards the end. But really, it really isn't that difficult. It's not a technical thing. And once you start, if you now produce your stuff by these formats, you'll soon, get more and more and more across the board. Have this stuff. It needs to be in the disability equality scheme here. It needs to have a bit more general attention. And things are getting better slowly. Students affected by this just need to be very patient, and we need to accept that things are going to take them a lot longer because of this. And I've put the references on the end. I'll send you this, Wendy, if you want it. Yeah. I put some references at the end. Okay, so I'll finish there. Are there any questions?
Can you just remind me again, what does putting things in text boxes do again?
Well, it's just difficult to read them with the screen reader.
Sometimes you get into a text box and you can't get out of it.
Oh, right.
That was a problem with yours.
Right.
Because you use the tab key to move around, and of course if you tab in a text box, it either deletes your text or moves it. Sometimes you couldn't get out.
I don't know if it's got a copy possibly that you weren't aware of or something. It may not.
Not, but
It's if I know in Linux If you get into a text box, Control Tab
Yes,
sometimes does.
sometimes does it. It
Yeah.
sometimes works, Michael, and sometimes it doesn't,
Yes.
and I don't know what that is. It's...
It's only for it to
But
be
you don't
there.
use it, is it?
Yeah. It's just not a good idea because it's, you know, it's unpredictable sometimes. You don't.
Part of it's just awareness. People just don't think.
They don't. No,
It
no.
needs to be part of what they're thinking.
No, I mean it's. I mean some of these he did because he didn't realise there were these alternative setups for slides. So he thought, you know, you've got the standard one. He's got a title, bullet points, but there are all these other ones: title, blank, title, bullet points, table. We found some of them, but not all of them. So sometimes, you know, rather than fiddle about a bit more, it just bunged in a text box because it was easier and he knew how to do it. I mean, that certainly is. I'm not, you know, we all guilty of that sometimes. You know, whether it's PowerPoint or anything. And you know, if you don't know what the implications are, you don't see any reason not to do it, do you?
One thing you haven't specifically mentioned today, but you did mention at the last talk I went to of yours, was using sans serif fonts. So
Yes,
fonts that are clear to use. Now, the problem I've had, and I think it's just I don't understand how to use PowerPoint because the training we had was very limited, never covered accessibility, is that the default font is, I think, Times New Roman. How do you change, do you know, the default font? Because I found the bit that says to change the font, it'll change it for a title on one slide, but I never found
Probably
how to do it globally.
Well, I did it so long ago.
Yeah.
I've forgotten how to do it for it, but you know, I mean, mine just opening in Arial now. One
So
thing you need to do is change it on the
this
slide
for everything, it doesn't
master.
do it.
See this, the slide master. You go. Can you see it?
Yeah.
Sorry, but if you go under View,
Right.
it's an option under View, Master,
Right.
Slide Master. So you get on there and set the font.
Right.
And another way to do it, if I close that view, under options.
Presentation, I'm sure do an hour one at the moment and change it on every single slide. It's taken forever.
No, no need
I know
to do
it's not
that.
possible,
If you go under Tools, Options, I think it is, yeah. Tools, Options. It's not that one.
Go to the format menu,
Is it Format?
format, and you find your list of font sizes, and then you can set that font to a default, which will change to, I think you've got to remember, you've got to close the document and reopen it, and it will change that font right the way through that presentation until you change it.
Well, mine's, yeah, just take the font. Mine's changed for everything. Default, yeah, tick the box. Default for new objects, that's the
And
one.
then you accept
So
it.
under Format, choose Font, and on that window there is a box, tick Default for new objects.
You will come back to you and say, are you sure you want to do this?
And when you do drawing on slides, so these text box and these diagrams, that it won't change the default for that. Neither the master nor the font will change that. In order to change the font for those, you need to go into I've just got to remember which one to press. Is it Insert?
Tools, options, and
Slide Design. Oh gosh, I do this so often. Slide Design, it's under Format. You'll get this up, this window on the right hand side, and you can choose. And Default Design, that's mine. That's my default, which I've obviously set up and forgotten all about. And you can edit that design, colour schemes, animation schemes. You can apply all kinds of things to the slide design, and then you can choose. Where's my default gone? Oh, I'm in another thing, but you can choose one of these provided or create your own, and it's in there that you would set. It's a bit of a long-winded, but you would set your options for draw so that you can set the fonts for the text boxes and things. So, you know, I mean, you do need to know a little bit more about PowerPoint, but the overall one is under Font and tick the box, Default. Sorry? Format font, yeah. This is where we did the colour. You need to edit colour schemes, change colour. That will give you, you can choose some standards or you can do a custom, and that pale cream we've done is a custom. We have set the RGB values for that. That is in the other paper. I'm trying, when I do these guidelines, I'm trying not to get in too much into the technicalities of PowerPoint, because not everyone's going to want to do it, and people won't adopt it if it's difficult to do, will they?